Now, gently close your eyes. Let your mind slowly relax. Feel every muscle in your body ease. Take a deep breath and slowly exhale. Once more, a deep breath and slowly release it. Your breath fills the room with a soft whisper, like a lullaby. Do you hear it? A distant, almost imperceptible whisper from the past. The silent echoes of great events that once unfolded? Perhaps an old song carried on the wind, or a memory rising from the depths of the earth. These whispers gently carry you slowly into the depths of your subconscious, into those magical corridors of history. We are here, in a place beyond time. Amidst the folds of an old map, in the faint rustle of parchments, among the dusty pages, do you smell that unique scent of history? The scent of ink, of paper, of old wood. We are drifting into the depths of history, in the heart of Europe, under the shadow of a great empire. The year is 1808. This year is not just a number, but also a turning point. A beginning where the fate of an emperor, the future of a continent, was written. A period where the rise and fall of an empire were silently woven. Every event is a harbinger of the next, linked like the rings of a chain in an unbreakable web of destiny. Emperor Napoleon ... his mind, like a vast ocean, is turbulent and constantly in motion. Every wave, a new strategy, a new conquest. Every wave reshapes the political map of Europe, redraws borders, demolishes the old order, and establishes a new one. His greatest enemy, that stubborn island, England. England, master of the seas, heart of commerce, the only place the emperor could not reach, besieged like a fortress, but unconquerable. The only way to bring it to its knees was an economic blockade, the continental system. The last knots of this massive net had to be tied. Every port on the continent had to be closed to British ships. Their trade had to be stopped, as if cutting off a windpipe. Sweden and Portugal. These two countries still left their doors open to British trade, like thorns in the emperor's eye. We leave Sweden to the cold embrace of Russia, awaiting the news that those northern winds will bring. But Portugal, England's loyal ally, its gateway to the Atlantic, like a bridge, a stone obstructing the emperor's plans. That is where the emperor set his sights. The ports of Portugal were England's lifeblood. This artery had to be severed, absolutely and urgently, without hesitation. On July 19th, an order echoed, like a whisper, but with the sharp force of a sword stroke. Portugal would close its ports to the British and declare war on England. This was not a simple request. It was an ultimatum, a threat. The Portuguese hesitated. Diplomatic notes went back and forth. Envoys rushed about. Whispers rose in the palace. Anxious glances flew through the air. They tried to buy time, perhaps hoping for a miracle. Perhaps some development would divert the emperor's attention, or a helping hand would extend from the British, a last ray of hope. Yet, though the emperor's patience was as deep as the vast oceans, it could sometimes be as limited as a grain of sand. And then the moment came. The order given to General Andoche Junot marched to Portugal with 30,000 soldiers, through Spain. This order set in motion a domino that would change the fate of the continent, entering an irreversible path, changing the course of a river. Imagine now that long road, the soft, regular sound of soldiers' boots pressing into the earth. Thousands of synchronized steps, forming a rhythm like a drumbeat, like the beating of your own heart. The earth, as if responding with a melody to every step, a faint rustle, a tune, a song. The rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind, the distant calls of birds, nature's own music. We are passing through the depths of Spain, silently, like shadows, carrying a secret with every step. By day, the faint glint of bayonets shining under the sun, shimmering heat waves rising over dusty roads, the distant silhouettes of mountains rising like giants. By night, the sky is adorned with thousands of stars, each a silent witness, observing this great march in the infinity of the cosmos. The faint crackle of campfires, the regular breathing of sleeping soldiers, the distant howling of wolves, the silent steps of sentries, moving like shadows. Fatigue, like a blanket, wraps itself around their bodies in the cool night, relaxing every muscle, inviting deep sleep. But every step serves a great purpose, part of a grand vision. The will of an empire echoes in every soldier's step, felt in every breath, like a whisper of destiny, ringing in your ears. November 1807. Our arrival in Lisbon was more like a sigh of relief than a triumph. The city was like a ghost. Streets were empty, windows closed, the harbor silent. Ships either fled or abandoned, a feeling of desolation. The Portuguese royal family, at the last moment, in the middle of the night, had boarded ships and fled to Brazil, leaving behind an empty palace, silent streets. When Junot entered Lisbon on November 30th, he found the city like a phantom. There was no resistance, only an emptiness, a feeling of abandonment, a sadness. The taste of this silent victory was a bitter peace. The echoing footsteps in the palace corridors, the silence in the empty rooms, the shadows of abandoned furniture, the gently swaying curtains, old memories brought by the wind. Everything was a harbinger of great change, the hand of an empire reaching out to a new continent, silently extending, weaving the threads of destiny. However, this silence was the harbinger of a new storm. While conquering Portugal, our army also covered northern Spain like a blanket. Soldiers were camping on Spanish soil, advancing under the astonished gaze of the local population. Curious whispers rising from the villages, anxious glances, silently speaking eyes. The emperor's intention was now becoming even clearer. Not just Portugal, but some provinces of Spain would also find their place on his grand map. The Spanish minister Godoy understood the situation, trembling with fear. Like a puppet, his strings were in the hands of others, and those strings were tightening, reaching a breaking point on the verge of disaster. He tried to persuade King Charles IV to imitate the Portuguese royal family and flee to South America. Perhaps this was the only way out, a flight devoid of honor but saving lives, the last struggles of a dynasty, the final pages of a history. They set out from Madrid in the silence of midnight. The wheels of the royal carriages made a faint clatter on the stone roads. The wind carried whispers, perhaps whispers of fate, perhaps of revenge. But at Aranjuez, a rebellion broke out. The Fernandista faction, supporters of the young Prince Ferdinand, rose up on March 17, 1808. The roar of the crowds, the flickering lights of torches, the surging wave of anger, sweeping everything before it like a flood, an unstoppable force. The people's patience had run out. They would no longer remain silent. They would raise their voices. Godoy was dismissed. Charles IV abdicated in favor of his son Ferdinand VII. A crown changed hands, like a whisper, but its echo would be heard throughout Spain, in every quarter. This was the first awakening of the Spanish spirit, the first faint tremor of a volcano, the harbinger of a great eruption, the awakening of a nation. The emperor saw this chaos as an opportunity. He sent General Joachim Murat to occupy Madrid. Murat, with threats and promises, induced both Charles and Ferdinand to proceed to Bayonne, to the emperor's presence. It was like a chess game, every move calculated in advance, every player living out their destiny, like pawns in a grand strategy in the emperor's hand. On May 5, 1808, in a historic meeting, the emperor forced Ferdinand to abdicate in favor of Charles, and Charles in favor of himself. The faint sound of the pen on paper drew the fate of an empire, an irreversible decision sealed with a signature. In return, the emperor promised that Spain would remain Roman Catholic and independent under a ruler whom he would name. And this ruler would be his brother, Joseph Bonaparte. A throne was being transferred to a family, but without the consent of the people, by force, by imposition, by tyranny. This was a blow to Spanish honor, opening a deep bleeding wound in the heart of a nation. But there was something the emperor had not calculated, the spirit of the Spanish people. That spirit, hidden deep within, was a fire that could ignite with a single spark, ready to erupt like a volcano, an unstoppable force. On May 2nd, the people of Madrid had already risen against the invader. This was the beginning of the Spanish War of Independence. This rebellion, which began with a whisper, quickly turned into a roar, like a fire spreading throughout Spain, consuming everything in its path. The rising voices in the streets, the clatter of weapons, but from a distance, like sounds heard in a dream, muffled and echoing, the beginning of a nightmare. The Madrid revolt was ruthlessly suppressed. The streets were washed with blood. Silent screams rose, but this was only the beginning. A seed had been planted, and this seed would spread throughout Spain, sprouting in every town, every village, taking root in the heart of every Spaniard, becoming a symbol of resistance. Rebellions broke out all over Spain, in rural areas, in the mountains, in the villages. The Spaniards showed an incredible talent for guerrilla warfare. This was an invisible enemy, not conforming to the rules of traditional warfare, like a ghost. In small groups, emerging from the shadows, they attacked our supply lines, our small detachments. At night, like the whisper of the wind, they appeared and disappeared in an instant, like phantoms, uncatchable. The rustle of leaves, the distant barking of dogs, silently moving shadows, watchful eyes in ambush, a danger at every moment. This was a war like a swarm of mosquitoes, constantly annoying, constantly biting, wearing down nerves. Soldiers expected an enemy behind every tree, an ambush under every stone. Their sleep was light, their nerves frayed. They expected an attack at any moment, living in a nightmare. Food and water became scarce. Communication lines were cut. A new trap was set every day. This was an invisible war that slowly eroded the morale of an army, spreading like a poison, permeating every cell, slowly killing, rotting from within. We were repulsed from Valencia. The city walls stood like fortresses, each stone a symbol of resistance, of determination. General Pierre Dupont had advanced into Andalusia, but was forced to retreat and finally capitulated with all his army at Bailén on July 23rd. Under the scorching sun, soldiers with cracked lips from thirst, bodies exhausted from fatigue, spirits crushed by despair, the pain of defeat, the silence of surrender, the faint sound of weapons falling to the ground, the whisper of despair, the bitter taste of defeat, of shame. This was an unexpected blow to the empire, a loss of prestige, a stain, a wound. The Spaniards now advanced upon the capital and expelled Joseph Bonaparte in August. This was a disappointment, yes, but only a temporary retreat. A minor setback that was part of a larger strategy. The emperor would never forget this defeat. It was a lesson for him, a warning. The French counterattack was not long in coming. The emperor reorganized his armies, sent new troops, with anger and determination. In December 1808, we recaptured Madrid. The regular sound of horses' hooves, the creaking of artillery carriages, the bitter echoes of victory, French marches echoing in the streets, the sound of revenge. The junta was forced to retreat southward to Seville, like the last stronghold of resistance, like a ray of hope, a final refuge. In January 1810, General Nicolas de Soult began the conquest of Andalusia, and with the fall of Seville in the same month, the central junta fled to Cadiz. Three things prevented the complete submission of the peninsula: Wellington's stubborn resistance in Portugal, the continuous activity of the guerrillas, and dissensions among the French. These three elements, combining, slowed down the emperor's grand plan, like an hourglass, slowing down time, every passing second taking a piece of the empire's power, like an erosion. Ah, Wellington, The British forces had first landed in Portugal on August 1st, 1808. They advanced silently, in a disciplined manner. The faint sound of their boots on the muddy ground, the wind fluttering their flags, the distant smell of the sea like a wind of hope. They quickly achieved some successes, conquering Lisbon and forcing the evacuation of the French from Portugal. Convention of Sintra, August 30th, 1808. This was a moment of breath for Portugal, a ray of hope, a whisper of freedom, the first taste of victory. In 1809, the French returned to Portugal, and the sounds of war began to echo again. The roar of cannons, the crackle of muskets, distant orders, the clatter of bayonets, the din of battle. For a short time, they held Oporto and Lisbon. But Wellington, despite some difficulties, managed to outflank them and lead a force towards Madrid. His victory at the Battle of Talavera, July 27th to 28th, 1809, was short-lived nevertheless. The noise of battle, the sound of cannons, the crackle of muskets, the groans of the wounded, an echo of pain. But now, these sounds are distant, like echoes from a dream, muffled and vague, memories of a nightmare. Fatigue was like a heavy burden on their bodies, numbing every muscle, exhausting their souls. He was compelled to retreat to central Portugal, where he fortified himself within the country around Lisbon. His celebrated lines of Torres Vedras. This was an engineering marvel, like the silent breath of a giant, an invisible wall protecting Portugal. Trenches dug deep into the earth, hidden cannons, silently waiting soldiers, each like a shadow, a guardian. Everything like a whisper, but a powerful whisper, the sound of resistance, of determination. The soft sound of earth being dug, the clatter of stones being placed, the wind whispering among the fortifications, the distant sound of waves, nature's own symphony. These lines were defensive works designed to resist any army the emperor could send against them. Wellington chose to wait here, patiently, like a hunter waiting for his prey, seizing the most opportune moment, like a master of strategy. This was a strategy, an art of gaining time, a game of patience, a war of wits. The French armies stood before these lines, astonished and admiring, rising like an impenetrable barrier, like a wall, like a dam. For the next 2 years, the battles and campaigns in various parts of Spain and Portugal, though numerous, were inconclusive. But these constant conflicts wore down the resources of the French, both in men, now numbering more than 200,000, and material. Every passing day, the power in this distant corner of the empire slowly eroded. Like the grains of an hourglass, it diminished with time, an unstoppable flow, an erosion. Distant musket fire, occasional cannon shots, endless patrols, night raids, the cunning attacks of guerrillas. The exhausted faces of the soldiers, the deep, silent weariness in their eyes, the shadow of despair, of exhaustion. Diseases spread, supplies became scarce, morale dropped, spreading like an epidemic, seizing every soldier. This was an insidious war that slowly consumed the power of an empire, spreading like a poison, permeating every cell, slowly killing, rotting from within. And then in 1811 to 12, the moment came when the emperor turned his full attention to Russia. A great threat was rising from the east, like an icy storm, a threat that would freeze everything. Not only were the depleted peninsular armies not reinforced, but as many as 30,000 men were withdrawn for the Grand Army, marching east. This was a major strategic move, like a gamble that would determine the fate of the entire empire. An empire had its priorities, and the great threat in the east was more important than this endless war in the west. The silent gathering of soldiers, the creaking of wagons, the footsteps heading far away, a whisper of farewell, a goodbye. A void had formed in the peninsula, a silence, an opportunity, a breathing space, a hope. Thus, from his base in Portugal, which he had successfully defended, Wellington began his gradual advance into Spain in 1812. His steps were determined, his plans clear, working like clockwork. His army worked like clockwork, every cog in its place, in perfect harmony, like a mechanism. His defeat of Marshal Jean-Baptiste Jourdan at the Battle of Vittoria on June 21, 1813, finally decided the issue in the peninsula. The last great roar of battle, then the silence, an echo of victory, the sound of liberation. Joseph Bonaparte withdrew from Spain, and Wellington fought his way across the Pyrenees into France, August 1813. The wind in the mountains, the whispers of soldiers, the silence of a final effort, the end of an era, the end of an empire. This was the end of an era, the beginning of an empire's decline, the end of a history. The emperor, after his crushing defeat at Leipzig, October 16th to 19th, 1813, recognized the impossibility of retaining his hold on Spain. The borders of an empire were shrinking, retreats were happening on every front. It was on the verge of collapse, of disintegration. He released Ferdinand. Ferdinand had been detained by the French at Valencay since his abdication in 1808. In March 1814, Ferdinand VII returned to Spain and the throne. The silent return of a king, the closing of an era, the rebirth of a nation, the sprouting of hope, the beginning of a future. The Peninsular War was one of the most challenging trials for a great empire, for a great man, Napoleon. A story that began with a whisper, turned into a roar, then slowly faded away. Every step, every decision, was part of a grand strategy, but also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a quest for freedom. And now, with the whispers of this story, you can close your eyes, take a deep breath, and surrender to the peaceful embrace of sleep. Let the sounds of the past stir you, but gently, like a lullaby, carrying you into sweet dreams, into the depths of history. Now your mind is clearing. Thoughts are drifting away one by one. There is only your breath, regular and calm. The silence of the night gently embraces you, like a blanket, warm and safe. The echoes of this old war are now just whispers, just memories. And you, within these memories, are drifting into a peaceful sleep. Good night. Sweet dreams.